Breakups are tough, even when you know they're for the best. I'd been trying to keep myself together after splitting up with my boyfriend of 2.5 years. I don't really want to get into it. It wasn't messy or dramatic. We just weren't right for each other anymore, but that didn't make it any easier. Some days, it felt like everything reminded me of him. I'd been forcing myself to stick to no contact, telling myself that it was the healthiest way for both of us to move on. It was hard though, really hard. One of the things I missed most about us was playing pool together. It was our thing. I'm a pretty decent player, definitely better than average, but my ex, he was incredible on his good days. He could pull off trick shots like it was nothing. 1-rail, 2-rail banks, kicks, combinations. I'm pretty sure he was even learning a standard mass. We each had pool tables at home, but obviously we're young, and staying inside every night wasn't exactly ideal. When we did go out, we always made sure that wherever we were going, usually a bar, had some pool tables. We hated crowded bars with long waits for tables and screaming patrons though, so the places we went were quieter, usually attracting an older crowd. Dive bars with old, scuffed tables and sticky floors were our sweet spot. Obviously, you can't expect to find a regulation table in pristine condition at any bar, but the dive bars were definitely a better shout than rowdy college bars. We were usually the youngest people there, but we didn't care. At that point in our relationship, we had grown somewhat bored of the typical college, let's get plastered every night mentality. Plus, even though I'm kind of shy, my ex was pretty charismatic and would get along with anyone. Us not being total newbies at pool didn't hurt either. A few weeks ago, I found myself missing that part of my life more than usual. It was a random Wednesday though, so none of my friends were free. I didn't want to sit around the house feeling sorry for myself anymore, so I decided to head out to one of the bars we used to go to. I told myself it wasn't about nostalgia, that I just needed to get out. Believe me, I'm not the type of person, nor do I usually have the confidence to go out myself, but I was feeling some type of way that night. The bar was exactly the same as I remembered. Dim lighting, worn out stools, a jukebox in the corner. The familiarity was comforting, but it also stung. The memories came flooding back, and I almost turned around and left right then, but I forced myself to stay. After grabbing a few drinks, I wandered over to one of the pool tables and started idly chalking a cue. I'm not really sure what I was planning on doing there. Playing alone would have been a little odd. Luckily, my question was answered because a guy walked over. He was maybe in his mid-20s, the only person in the room even close to my age. He leaned against the table and asked if I was up for a game. I nodded and told him to rack him up. He put some money in the slot and started racking the balls. I laughed to myself as he racked them wrong, but I didn't say anything. We played a few rounds, and I started to relax. He wasn't bad, not as good as my ex, but not terrible. I wasn't going easy on him though. I won every rack we played. We chatted as we played, and he even bought me a couple of drinks. He was friendly enough, but it quickly became clear he wasn't the brightest guy in the world. I like sharp and quick-witted guys who can hold their own in a conversation. This guy, not so much. Still, I didn't mind. It felt good to just play and talk and not overthink things for once. I was having a good time. After the 4th game, he popped the question, asking if I wanted to go back to his place. The question caught me off guard, but I guess I couldn't have been too shocked. I froze for a second before shaking my head. I tried to make it playful, saying he'd need a second date for that. In all honesty, I just didn't want to move so quickly. I guess I wouldn't have been totally opposed to taking things further with him, but a random Wednesday night wasn't the time for that. I guess I didn't do a good job turning him down though, because his entire demeanor changed. His smile dropped, and he literally started scowling at me. I was not prepared for what happened next. He said, "Are you serious?" and grabbed my wrist, saying something about spending all that money on those drinks. Before I could respond, he snatched my purse too. I had never been in a situation like that, so instead of screaming or fighting, I just kind of froze up. Even though we were in a public place, I was still terrified. Luckily, a couple of older guys at the bar noticed what was happening and stepped in. I'm honestly not sure what I would have done had they not. One of them told the guy to let me go. The guy glared at me, muttered something under his breath, and threw my purse back onto the table before storming right out of the bar. My heart was still racing. and I thanked those guys profusely for helping me out. That was it for me, though. I called an Uber and left the bar, still kind of shocked and trying to process what had just happened. I decided to close my eyes in the Uber. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I remember is the Uber driver gently waking me up. We were parked across the street from my house. I thanked him, got out of the car, and started walking toward the door. As I rummaged through my bag for my keys, I impulsively checked my phone for the first time since leaving the bar. That's when I saw it. That god-awful notification, AirTag found moving with you. I nearly dropped my phone. My hands started to shake as I rummaged through my purse, tossing aside my wallet and makeup until my fingers brushed against something unfamiliar. I pulled it out and stared in disbelief. There was literally an AirTag in my bag. A wave of panic hit me, way worse than what I was feeling earlier. I was still standing in the middle of the street, so I threw it on the ground and stomped on it a bunch of times until I was sure it was broken. I fought back a scream and started breathing heavily. The cold wasn't helping. I needed to get inside. I looked around frantically, but the street was completely empty. Whoever had planted the AirTag, probably that guy from the bar, would know exactly where I was. Maybe not my exact house, but the street for sure. The houses on my street are large and spaced out, so he'd definitely be able to narrow it down. I grabbed my purse and sprinted to the back door, fumbling with the lock before finally getting inside. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. I was safe, but I couldn't stop shaking. I walked up to my room, wondering how I had gotten myself into this mess. Normally I'm asleep by 10 and out cold for 9 or 10 hours, but there was no way I was going to sleep that night. I looked out my bedroom window, thinking maybe the scenery would lull me to sleep or something. As I was looking out the window, kind of mindlessly, I noticed an old, beat-up Lincoln drive slowly past my house. Nothing too unusual, but it was kind of late for cars to be driving on a residential road. But then it came back from the opposite direction, and I knew something was wrong. It passed even slower the second time, like the driver was scanning the houses. I didn't want to face the reality of the situation, but when it passed a third time, I had no choice. It was the guy. It had to be. He was trying to find my house. I wanted to scream again. The next time the car passed, the driver's side window was rolled halfway down. I wanted to call the police, but I didn't want that guy to know he was in the right area. I know that doesn't make any sense, but I was so scared and couldn't think straight. The next time the car passed, the driver's hand was hanging out of the window, holding something. It looked like a knife. And then, instead of driving past, the car stopped in the middle of the road, right across from my house. I ducked down, my heart beating a million beats a minute again. I stayed there, crouched below the window, too terrified to move. By the time I looked up, the car was gone. I waited for what must have been an hour, but it didn't come back. The next morning, I told my parents everything. My dad scolded me for not calling the police, but I told him I was too scared to. He called a buddy of his, a police chief, to ask for advice. His friend said there wasn't much they could do without more evidence or the car's plate number, which I hadn't been able to see. His friend told us to call the police immediately should we ever see that car again. I didn't leave the house for days. Even now, I'm really scared that he's waiting somewhere and he's gonna see me enter or exit my house again. I haven't seen the car since though, so maybe the nightmare is over. I don't have the most exciting life, but it's comfortable. I'm 40, single, no kids. Some people might find that depressing, but honestly, I don't mind. I've got a steady job, a decent house, and no one to answer to but myself. I work as a bartender at a high-end luxury rooftop in a neighboring town, catering to the kind of clientele who think regular bars are beneath them. I don't live anywhere near that level of luxury myself. My place is in a pretty middle-of-the-pack neighborhood, about 20 minutes away, but working there has its perks. The tips are amazing. People in that area aren't shy about throwing money around, and the rotating crowd keeps things interesting. Since the bar is upscale, we don't have the typical regulars you find in a dive. I like that. I never quite liked how close some customers would get with me, or any other bartender for that matter. Maybe that's just me though. I like to keep to myself. I should probably mention that my name's Kevin. That'll be important later. It was a Friday night, our busiest night. The place was packed as usual, with groups of friends clinking glasses, couples on date nights, and a few folks who probably wandered in just to feel important. I always like playing a mental game with my patrons. I try to figure out which ones are pretending to be something they're not. You can tell a lot about people by the way they order a drink. The ones who ask for complicated cocktails are usually trying to impress someone. The ones who order a whiskey neat, they've had a day. I had my eye on a couple at the end of the bar who were down to their last sips of wine. It's always better to offer a refill before they wave you down. I was in my groove, mixing drinks and chatting with customers, when I noticed someone walk in who definitely looked out of place. I clocked the guy immediately. He was clenching his teeth and scowling like he was furious. He had jet black hair that wasn't combed and sat like a bird's nest on his forehead. He was wearing a blank black hoodie under a faded leather jacket, which looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. There were stains all over it, but none of that was as unsettling as his face. Like I said, he just looked so angry. He made a beeline for the bar, but he didn't sit down. He just stood there, staring at me. I wondered to myself how he had gotten past the doorman in the lobby. I cleared my throat and asked if I could get him something to drink, trying to keep my tone neutral despite the weird vibe he was giving off. He didn't answer right away, which was strange. He just kept glaring at me like he was getting ready to swing. Finally, he muttered that he wanted a double shot of Jaeger. I nodded, grabbed a glass, and poured the shot. Jaeger isn't a drink we pour often here. Most of our patrons are likely to ask for something a little higher quality. But hey, if someone wants Jaeger, I'm not about to question their taste. I set the glass in front of him and moved on to serve a few other patrons. When I came back to charge him, he tossed crumpled cash onto the counter. That also threw me off. Hardly anyone pays in cash at this place. Again, though, it wasn't my place to judge. The guy didn't say anything as I rang him up, and I was ready to move on when he spoke again. I still remember his exact words. "I knew I'd find you here, Kevin." I froze. My eyes snapped to his as I scrambled to process what he just said. I put the glass in my hand down and demanded to know how he knew my name. I didn't want to make a scene, so I kept my voice low, but I hoped he got the gist of how serious I was. He didn't answer my question, just stared at me with the same angry intensity. Finally, he said, "I know what you did." Before I could ask him what he meant, he turned and walked towards the elevators. I wanted to yell something or chase after him, but I decided against it. I was on the clock. I couldn't just neglect my job. Instead, I just stood there for a moment, completely thrown off. I was honest to God confused out of my mind. I didn't recognize him in the slightest. I couldn't think of anything I had done that would warrant such a cryptic statement. I'm no saint, but I don't go around making enemies. It put me in a sour mood for the rest of the night. When my shift finally ended, I drove home, but I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened earlier. I racked my brain for literally any explanation that made sense, but couldn't think of any. By the time I ended up going to bed, I was still relatively unsettled by the whole thing. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up randomly. I wasn't really sure what woke me up, as I didn't have to go to the bathroom and I'm usually the type of person to sleep through the night. I didn't hear or see anything, but something felt off. Without moving, I kept my eyes open, waiting for them to adjust to the darkness. After about a minute, I saw something that gave me an adrenaline rush of fear. There was a dark mass in the corner of my room, next to the door. It was just standing there, but I was 100% sure it was something that didn't belong in my room. I felt my heart start to race, but I forced myself to stay still, pretending to still be asleep. Someone was in my room. I repeated that thought to myself like 6 times before truly processing it. I knew I had to do something. I counted silently to 3, and in one quick motion, I sprung out of bed, screaming like a crazy person. I was prepared for a fight, but the figure didn't come toward me. Instead, he bolted for the door. As he moved, I heard something clatter to the floor. I chased after him through my house, but by the time I reached the front door, it was wide open, and whoever had been in my room was gone. I wanted to run out into the yard to look for him, but I was worried that I'd be walking directly into a trap. Instead, I made what I still think is the smart decision and slammed the door shut and locked it. I thought back to the clatter I had heard earlier in my room. I walked back to my bedroom, turned on the light, and froze. In the corner of the room, there was a knife, just laying there on the floor. It was one of mine, taken from the kitchen. I felt sick. Whoever I had just chased was planning to hurt me, possibly kill me. I called the police right after that, and they quickly arrived and searched both my house and my yard, but found nothing. I gave a description of the man from the bar, and the police got the video footage from my bar, but they haven't been able to find him yet because I haven't heard anything. The thing that freaks me out the most is that I know for a fact I had locked all my doors that night. I locked them every night. During their search, though, the police were never able to figure out how that man entered my house. None of the windows were broken or unlocked, and there was no sign of forced entry. To this day, I still have no idea how he got inside. I haven't seen him since, but I would be lying if I said I don't think about this encounter often. I work as a bartender at a bar and restaurant in a suburb just outside Baltimore. I'll do my best to explain the layout so the story makes sense. It's a busy place with a unique setup. There are no waiters, just bartenders like me and the cooks in the back. If you want to find food or non-alcoholic drinks, you have to order them at the bar, and when everything's ready, you grab it from the counter. I'm not sure why things are done that way, but I guess it had something to do with management being cheap and trying to avoid hiring waiters. Either way, it keeps things fast-paced, which I actually like. For whatever reason, the place is really popular, even though I personally don't think it's anything super special. The atmosphere is lively most nights, with great music, a buzzing crowd, and a standing area near the DJ booth where people gather to dance and chat. The constant flow of customers and the high-energy vibe make the job fly by. I love meeting and talking to new people, so the gig is perfect for me. I would probably lose my mind if I had to wait long periods of time between serving guests, but that's just me. I bet some people are the opposite. That particular night started off like any other. It was a weekend, so things were going to be super busy. I was ready. After a certain time, the bar started filling up with people. It looked like more of a younger college crowd that night, which meant more dancing, more spilling, and a rowdier environment in general. Oh yeah, and worse tips, which kind of sucked for me. This one group of kids just kept on ordering round after round of tequila shots faster than I could line up the salt and limes. It's always chaos when they take over the bar. One of them was so plastered he used the same pickup line on me like 3 times. I was running around doing my thing when I noticed an elderly couple walk in and sit down at the booth in the corner of the restaurant. At first glance, there was nothing strange about them. I just thought it was interesting that 2 people that age would want to come into a rowdy place like this. I didn't have too much time to think about it though, so I went back to work. Fast forward maybe 30 minutes to an hour. I was halfway through pouring a line of gin and tonics when I noticed the couple again. My hands kept working, muscle memory taking over, but my brain was stuck on them for some reason. That's when it hit me. They were just sitting there motionlessly. They hadn't ordered anything either. No food and definitely not any drinks I would have remembered. I looked a little closer and realized that they weren't even looking at each other. They were both fixated at the wall next to them. From what I could tell, it didn't look like they were talking either. It was the strangest thing. I was beyond curious, but the bar was slammed, and I had too much to do to spend time wondering about it. I figured they might be waiting for someone or didn't realize how the place worked. Maybe they were waiting for a waiter to take their order. When I finally had a break, I decided to check on them myself. I walked over to the table and put on my most polite smile. As I approached, neither of them turned to face me. They were both still staring at the wall like statues. I cleared my throat and asked them if they wanted anything to eat or drink. The woman didn't even flinch. She kept staring at the wall like I hadn't spoken at all. The man turned his head slowly, like he was moving in slow motion. When his face came into view, I felt a chill run through me. His skin was pale and wrinkled, and his eyes were almost sunken into his face completely. He didn't speak, just stared at me and shook his head once, firmly but silently. Something about the way he looked at me made my stomach twist. I muttered something in response and quickly returned to the bar. I had the weirdest feeling in my gut after that. Those people looked like they didn't even belong in this century, let alone this bar. I didn't look over at that booth for a long time. Eventually, things started to die down a little, and and I remembered the couple. I glanced over impulsively, and I nearly dropped the glass I was holding. Both of them were staring directly at me now. I made direct eye contact with the woman, but she never averted her gaze. I don't think I'd ever been more uncomfortable at my job than I was in that moment. I looked away and pretended to be busy, trying not to freak out completely. By the time I glanced back again, the booth was empty. I was relieved. I was just glad that they were gone, as mean as that sounds. By the end of the night, I was still thinking about the whole thing. As I wiped down the bar and closed up with my coworker Karen, I decided to ask her if she saw anything strange. She's, I guess, what you would call a vet. She's been working there for years and prides herself on noticing everything and everyone that comes through the doors. When I asked her about the couple, she gave me a confused look and said she didn't know what I was talking about. I looked at her blankly and told her I was talking about the elderly couple that was sitting in the corner booth. She shook her head and told me she didn't remember seeing anyone like that. She then jokingly asked me if I was hallucinating, which got a playful laugh out of me, but on the inside though, I was losing it. I knew what I had seen. I asked her if she was sure, and she crossed her arms before listing at least 10 random people who had ordered food that night and what they were wearing. I laughed again and complimented her memory, but like I said before, I was dying on the inside. By the time we locked up, I started doubting myself. As I walked to my car, I noticed something that made me nearly drop my keys in fear. Across the street, there were 2 dark figures standing under a lone streetlight. I knew it was them. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. I didn't wait another second. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and sped out of the lot without another look. The drive home was awful. I was trying not to break down the whole time. I just kept repeating, "Oh my God," over and over. I had so many questions. Had Karen somehow missed them? Were those people even real? Was I going insane? I couldn't explain it. I thought I was going crazy. I wish this story had a resolved ending, but it doesn't. I never saw those people again. I never got any kind of explanation. I don't think I ever will. Before getting into the stories, I'd like to talk about today's sponsor, Factor 75. October's a busy month for me, and I struggle to find as much free time. Thereby, I have less time to meal prep and cook. That's why Factor has been extremely useful for me. Factor makes meeting your nutrition goals easier than ever by delivering fresh, never frozen, dietitian-approved meals right to your doorstep. Factor takes the stress out of meal planning and leaves you more time in your day-to-day life by skipping the grocery stores, prep work, and cooking fatigue. Instead, you get chef-crafted meals delivered right to your door. Factor has over 35 meals to choose from per week, including options like keto, calorie smart, vegan and veggie, and more. Factor has been extremely convenient for me lately, as I go with the high protein options, with my favorite being Peruvian chicken with red pepper cauliflower grits and roasted broccoli, perfect for after the gym. Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code 50nightmare to get 50% off and free shipping on your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders. That's code 50nightmare at factor75.com to get 50% off and free shipping on your first box, plus 20% off on your next box of orders. Let me give you some context so the story I'm about to tell you is more understandable. Our cat Cosmo has always slept in the basement. Every night since I was a little kid, our parents would scoop him up from wherever he was lounging and stick him in the basement. They detested all the cat hair he'd leave behind on their bed, which I guess was understandable. He was also an outdoor cat, so if one of us forgot to put him in the basement at night, he'd wake my parents up at 3 a.m. screaming to be let out. The basement's huge, the biggest room in our house, so I figured he liked having all that space. A little over 2 weeks ago, as I'm writing this, he started acting weird. There's a little landing at the top of the basement stairs just behind the door. That's where we'd usually put him. After a few minutes, he'd walk down the stairs and sleep on whatever piece of furniture he pleased. One night, I placed him delicately on the landing and gently shut the door, something I'd done a million times. As I was filling my water glass in the kitchen though, I heard him meowing from behind the door. That was odd. He usually trotted down the stairs immediately. I finished filling my glass and walked over to the door, wondering if someone had maybe forgotten to fill his dish. I opened the door, and he darted out into the living room as if he were chasing something. I checked the dish, and it was completely full. Weird, I thought, turning to go find him. I put him back on the landing step, closed the door, and that was that. The next 2 nights were essentially the same. I'd put him on the landing, close the door, and start getting ready for bed. After a few minutes, I'd hear him repeatedly meowing. I'd go over to the door, and it was always the same thing. He'd just linger at the top of the stairs, refusing to go down. I worried that maybe he was just getting old, but that was a thought I didn't want to confront just yet. It killed me to do it, but I just ignored him, knowing he'd walk down the stairs eventually. The day after that, he refused to enter the house at all. Usually when he wanted to come in, he'd just hang out at our front steps or by the back door until one of us saw him through the glass and let him inside. At one point, I noticed him curled up on our doormat. I went to let him in, but he didn't move. I went out and petted him a little before going back inside. A few hours later, I walked by the door again and saw that he still hadn't moved. It was getting late, so I picked him up and carried him inside, which he wasn't too happy about. I knew he didn't want to go to sleep downstairs, so I let him sleep in my room that night. It wasn't a big deal, and he seemed a lot calmer that way. Of course, that solution didn't last. For the next few days, my dad kept complaining that someone was leaving the basement door open. He was mad because it was letting all the cool air escape downstairs. Air conditioning wasn't free, which was something he loved reminding us. I assumed it was my sister. She's always been the type to leave doors and drawers open without thinking. I didn't really pay it that much thought. I was just happy that Cosmo seemed to have mellowed out after being allowed to sleep in my room. One night, I woke up randomly in the middle of the night. In my groggy, half-awake state, I glanced over to the door and saw something weird. There was a silhouette standing in my bedroom doorway. It was just standing there, perfectly still. I could tell it was a person because I could see their outline in the faint glow of the lamp we'd leave on in the den. I figured it had to be my sister, so I called out to her, but the figure moved away without a word. I was too tired to figure out what she wanted, so I just went back to sleep. A couple of days later, we discovered what had been keeping Cosmo away from the basement. A flea infestation. The whole place was crawling with them. It was disgusting. We assumed the fleas were the reason Cosmo had refused to go down there, which made sense, but it was strange how they came out of nowhere. We'd never had a flea problem before, and Cosmo always wore a flea collar. My dad yelled at my mom for not changing out his collar, even though she swore she had. My dad went all out, tearing through every corner of the basement to clean it thoroughly. We vacuumed the carpets, sprayed the entire room, and washed everything down with flea-killing solutions. He told us to stay out of the basement for the next few days so that any stragglers would die off without a host. It seemed like a good plan, and I figured that'd be the end of it. But then, a few nights later, another strange thing happened. I was lying in bed when I noticed light seeping in under my door, flickering on and off like someone was playing with the hallway switch. I told myself it was probably just my dad getting up to use the bathroom or something. But the flickering continued, going on for longer than seemed normal. It was starting to freak me out, but I couldn't bring myself to check it out. I lay there, heart pounding, staring at the bottom of the door, hoping it would stop. Eventually, it did. I forced myself to fall asleep after that, but I've never felt more uneasy in my life. A few more days passed without incident. My dad said the basement was probably clear, which was great because I had been missing playing video games down there. After getting home from school, I went down to the basement. As soon as I got down the stairs, though, I noticed something was wrong. There were still fleas down there, a decent amount of them. It didn't make any sense. After all the cleaning, they should have been long gone. I went back upstairs to call my dad at work, but he just said to give it time. He insisted that any fleas left would die soon enough. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something else going on, though. It wasn't normal for fleas to keep thriving like that after everything we'd done. So the next day after school, I decided to investigate a bit further. I went down to the back of the basement and into the storage room where we kept some old boxes and tools, figuring maybe a rodent had gotten in and died somewhere. I opened the door and instantly knew I was right. The smell hit me almost immediately. This thick, rotten stench that clung to the air and made my eyes water. I followed the smell to the far end of the room, where there was an unfinished crawl space that connected to the plumbing for the whole house. It was pitch black back there, and the smell only got stronger as I stepped closer. I didn't want to go in there. It was too dark anyway. I turned to grab a flashlight, and that's when I heard it. Breathing. It was faint at first, but steady, like someone was hiding in there. I froze. I felt a pit forming in my stomach. The breathing got louder, as if whoever or whatever it was coming closer. I backed away. Before I could react, I saw a figure lunge toward the end of the crawl space, moving fast. A hand reached out for me, but I jumped away before it could grab me. I didn't stay to get a better look. I ran upstairs as fast as I could, slammed the basement door shut, and called the police. When they arrived, they searched the house, but there was no sign of anyone. They found some empty chip bags and food wrappers stashed in the crawl space, but that was it. Whoever had been down there had escaped through the storm door at the back of the basement. The officer said it was probably a homeless person who'd snuck in looking for shelter, but I couldn't help but wonder how long they'd been living there and how much they'd seen. My parents were twice as shocked as I was. We've kept the basement door locked ever since, and Cosmos still won't go anywhere near that door. I don't remember every detail of this story since I was only around 7, but my parents have filled in some of the gaps over the years, and there are still bits and pieces that stick out in my memory. So here goes. I'm an only child. Yeah, it kind of sucked growing up by myself, but one of the pros meant that my parents were a lot more involved in my life. They'd really go out of their way to make sure I was thriving, and I look back appreciatively on that. Every year around Halloween, my parents would transform our basement into a haunted house. It wasn't anything fancy, just some old decorations, fake spiderwebs, strobe lights, and a lot of enthusiasm. The whole thing was for a good cause. You had to donate canned food to get in, and my parents would give everything we collected to the local food bank. They even made flyers and passed them around my school and a couple of other elementary schools nearby. The vast majority of people who came were parents of kids in my school, but there were always a handful of parents and kids that we didn't know. My parents actually welcomed that. The more strangers there were, the more food they'd be able to collect, and the greater the likelihood that the haunted house would be a hit. We lived in a pretty big brick house in Haverton, Pennsylvania. A lot of the houses in our neighborhood were fully brick for historical reasons I won't get into. That also meant that most of them were really old too, since it was kind of frowned upon to do any remodeling. Our house was the kind of place that already had a bit of an eerie vibe to it, especially at night with its old creaky floors and dimly lit hallways. Every year, my cousins Jeff, Rick, Chaz, and Eric would come down to help my parents set up and manage the night. Usually, they'd dress up in scary costumes and hide around the basement to jump out and scare my friends. That year, they decided to go all out and wore matching anonymous masks. You know, those kind of creepy white masks with the blank expressions. The haunted house was a big hit that year, as usual. We had a good crowd going by early evening, but my parents told me later that there had been a strange man who showed up before things really got started. He wasn't with any kids, which was odd since the haunted house was mostly for families. He said his wife was planning to bring their daughter later on, but he wanted to drop off some food cans early. My parents didn't recognize him, but they figured it wasn't a big deal. They thanked him, took the cans, and stood there awkwardly before he got the hint and left. As the night went on and more people showed up, the basement got pretty chaotic. I remember trying to keep up with my friends, who were screaming and laughing as we ran through the decorations. At one point, one of my friends came up to me crying, saying someone in an anonymous mask had scared her. I tried to calm her down and told her it was just one of my cousins, but then she said something that made my stomach drop. She said the person had grabbed her wrist and tried to pull her into a closet. I didn't know what to make of it. I thought maybe she was just being dramatic, but the look on her face told me she was genuinely scared. I went and found my parents and told them what she said. They took it seriously and went down to the basement to check things out. They asked my cousins if they had seen anything strange. Jeff, Rick, and Chaz were all in their positions, and each one of them swore they hadn't done anything like that. But then my parents noticed something else. Eric wasn't at his post. Just then, everyone started to panic. Eric came running down the stairs. He said he'd taken a break to use the bathroom upstairs, and that when he came back, his anonymous mask was gone. He figured one of the other guys had taken it as a joke. That set off alarm bells for my parents, and they immediately shut down the haunted house. They made everyone leave and called the police, who came and searched the house, but of course, nothing turned up. That night, I was still a little shaken up, but I figured it was all over. I fell asleep easily enough, but then I woke up to this tapping sound. It was soft but noticeable, like someone was repeatedly knocking on my bedroom window. I was too scared to get up, so I just laid there, pulling the covers over my chin, hoping I could just fall asleep. After a few minutes, the knocking stopped, and I managed to drift back to sleep. But a few hours later, I was woken up again, this time by a scratching noise. It was more urgent than the knocking had been, like someone was clawing at the window frame. I was terrified, but something inside me snapped, and I threw the covers off and rushed to the window. I yanked open the curtains, and my heart nearly stopped. There, staring back at me, was a person in an anonymous mask, only inches away from the glass. I screamed for my parents. They rushed into the room, and I pointed frantically at the window, but by the time they looked, the person was gone. We called the police once again, and they searched the yard and surrounding area, but they didn't find anyone. There were no signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. The property was clear. A few months passed, and things settled down. The haunted house was just a memory by then, and my parents had started to ease up on their extra security measures. Then, one day, I came home from school to find an anonymous mask laying on my bed. It wasn't just any mask. It looked exactly like the ones my cousins had worn that night. But the thing that really freaked me out was the writing. Scrawled across the forehead in black Sharpie was my name. How the hell had that guy even known my name? We called the police again, but there wasn't much they could do besides file a report. My parents added more security cameras and made sure all the doors and windows were locked tight every night. They really went over the top with the security, adding a full alarm system and putting sensors on every window, including the upstairs ones. After that, nothing else happened. At least not that we could prove. The next few months were fine, but I swore I kept hearing things outside my bedroom window. Tapping, scratching, you name it. It was probably nothing, but it got to the point where I was scared to sleep in my own bed. I've since grown up and moved out of that house, but sometimes I still wonder if there was more to the story behind what happened to me all those years ago. I recently got a job at a Mexican joint in a neighboring town. The area was a bit sketchy, but it wasn't anything I couldn't handle. I was also pretty desperate for money, so it's not like I really had a choice. Plus, I figured working nights wouldn't be so bad, since I'd have most of the day to myself. The restaurant itself was decent enough, but the manager, Carlos, was, well, shady. He always scheduled me for the worst hours, kept me late, and never seemed particularly concerned about following the rules. He was the type of guy who made you feel like you couldn't trust him. But like I said, I didn't have much of a choice. I needed the job. One night, while closing up, I started hearing these weird noises. I was mopping the tiled floor in the kitchen when I first heard it. As I was mopping, I picked up on these two muffled sounds that sounded like soft thuds and scraping. They were coming from below the floor. It was faint at first, but I knew I wasn't imagining it. The thudding and scraping would alternate, but I was positive that there were two distinct sounds I was hearing. I listened for a while, and the noises continued for a minute before stopping completely. It startled me, but I brushed it off as something small, maybe an animal outside or the pipes settling. But it kept happening. The noise would start up when the place got quiet, just as I was finishing up my cleaning. After a few nights of this, I told Carlos about it. He shrugged it off immediately and told me it was nothing and to stop worrying. He went as far as to say the restaurant didn't even have a basement. That's when I got a little suspicious. I knew he was lying because I had literally seen the window wells around the back of the building. I wanted to tell him that, but held my tongue. I figured I'd give it another day. Maybe the noises would stop on their own. Of course, the noises continued. I complained to him the next day and told him that the place must have a basement since there were literally windows below the ground. That's when he gave me this strange look and insisted that there was no basement. He told me that the previous owners of the building had sealed it years ago, and no one can get in or out. Then he told me in a firm voice to just focus on my job and stop poking around. The way he said it, so dismissive and firm, gave me a bad feeling, but I didn't want to lose the job, so I dropped it. I figured maybe it was just some animal that had somehow gotten in. It was just weird that Carlos was so insisting on not checking it out or taking me seriously. For the next few days, the noises persisted. Every night it was the same, those strange, low thuds and occasional scraping, like something or someone was moving down there. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, but I tried to ignore it. Then one night after closing up, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to take a look for myself. I walked around to the back of the building where the window wells were. I crouched down and tried to peer through one of the windows. It was pitch black inside, and I couldn't see anything, even with my phone flashlight. Just as I was about to give up, a light flickered on inside the basement just for a second. Then it snapped off before I could see anything clearly. I froze, my heart racing, unsure of what I had just seen. I rushed back to my car, too freaked out to go back inside, but I didn't tell Carlos. Something about the whole situation made me feel like it was better to keep quiet. I was not prepared for what was about to happen, though. The next time I closed, I couldn't resist the urge to go check out those windows again. I fully admit that my hands were shaking as I walked around the building. I knew nothing good was going to come from poking around. I crouched down to get a good look. This time, as I leaned in closer to get a better look, I saw it. Pressed up against the glass was a face. It was a man, but not just any man. He looked completely deranged. His hair was wild and his face was filthy, like he hadn't bathed in weeks. His yellow eyes were wide, staring right at me through the glass. He bashed his head against the window and gave me this demented smile. I screamed and stumbled back, totally losing my shit. I ran for my car without looking back. My hands shook as I fumbled with my keys, but I managed to get in and speed off before anything else could happen. The next day, I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I went straight to Carlos and told him everything. To my surprise, he didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he sat me down and actually told me the truth. He admitted that the person I had seen was actually his brother, who had been living in the basement. He said his brother was mentally ill, dangerous even, and Carlos had been hiding him down there to keep him out of trouble. The basement had been sealed off to the public years ago, but Carlos had found a way to let his brother live down there, away from prying eyes. He urged me not to say anything, and said he'd appreciate it if I forgot this whole thing ever happened. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to quit right then and there, but I couldn't. I was so strapped for cash that the idea of looking for another job didn't feel like a real option. So I stuck around, convincing myself it would be fine as long as I stayed away from the basement. I tried to keep my head down and avoid Carlos, but the whole thing left me on edge. A few weeks later, something happened that made me regret staying. It was late, and I had just finished closing up. As I walked to my car, I noticed something or someone lurking in the tree line next to the parking lot. It was just a figure, but I knew in my gut it was a person. I had a feeling I knew who it was. My heart started racing, but I pretended not to notice. I kept walking, trying to stay calm, but then I heard footsteps behind me. I glanced over my shoulder, and there he was, the same man from the basement. He was hobbling strangely toward me, but clearly moving as quickly as he could. I scrambled for my keys and managed to unlock the door and throw myself inside just as he reached the door. He slammed his face against the window, smearing it with dirt and sweat, and started pounding on the glass. I screamed, but I couldn't think straight. All I knew was I had to get out of there. I sped off as fast as I could. I'm not sure how I made it home that night without crashing. I've never been more scared in my entire life. I still thank God that he had some kind of limp, otherwise he would have definitely caught me. That was my last night working at the restaurant. I called the police from the safety of my apartment, but I never went back. I didn't want to know what happened next, whether they found the man or if Carlos got in trouble for what he'd done. I just couldn't be involved anymore. Even now, though, I can't shake the feeling that Carlos might come looking for me one day. I don't know if he'd go to great lengths to do something like that, but it's a thought that sits in the back of my head. I never found out what happened to the restaurant, Carlos, or his brother, and honestly, I don't think I want to. Maybe I'll take a drive by that restaurant sometime in the future, but for now, I want to stay as far away from that place and those people as possible. I'm not a big birthday celebrator. I'm not the type to make a big thing and invite all my friends out or throw a party. My close friends know this, so usually I'll do something more low-key with my family or close friends. One year in particular, after I went to dinner with my family, 3 of my friends were texting me trying to make plans to go out and do something. Not out to bars or anything, we were only 19 at the time and didn't have fake IDs. My friend Jay has a Jeep, so he suggested we go night off-roading on one of the trails about a half hour from our houses. It was this really huge state park that had trails big enough to off-road on. He had done it before. Technically, you're not allowed to, but past dark, nobody's in those woods. Since my birthday's in July, the days are really long. It doesn't get pitch black until around 9 o'clock, and I'd say that was around the time we started heading over to the park. My friend Carl brought a bunch of weed, and my other friend Joey brought a handle of vodka to celebrate my birthday. The plan was to hotbox the car in the middle of the woods and just get really fucked up. Jay wouldn't be partaking in the alcohol since he was driving. So past a certain hour, the entrance to the state park's parking lot would be coned off, but since there's no night security guards, it's easy to just get out and move one of the cones and drive around it. We just were on the lookout for any cops before entering the parking lot. Once we passed the entrance, there was a somewhat long stretch of a narrow one-way road with woods on either side, and then eventually it led to the big open parking lot, which also was surrounded by woods on 3 sides and then baseball fields and a playground on another. Jay knew exactly where to go to get to the trails, which were technically for walking, but they were plenty wide enough to drive on according to him. We made sure there were no cops sitting in the parking lot before entering the trail though. Once we were on the trail, Jay turned his brights on to have better visibility. Some parts of the trail were definitely very bumpy and tight, where he'd have to drive slowly to be sure not to scrape any trees or bushes on either side. The trails were not made for cars after all, so caution was necessary. But it was definitely fun at first, where the trail would open up, where there would be drops. The bumpiness of the ride made it fun, almost like an amusement park ride. Carl lit up the joint he rolled and started passing it around. When we were deep enough into the trails, Jay stopped the engine and turned off the headlights. We sat in the car with the music playing and the bottle being passed around. The music was pretty loud too, so when all of us thought we heard something from outside, we genuinely went silent and looked at each other. Jay turned off the music, and we all said basically at the same time, "What was that?" or "Did you guys hear that?" We all agreed it sounded like a high-pitched screaming. Jay turned the headlights back on, but we didn't see anyone in front of us. Still, we wanted to move out of that immediate spot, so he drove a little further down the trail. Once we stopped again, we agreed it might have been a female fox we heard. From here on, we hung out with the music a bit lower, and we were just chilling making mixed drinks. At one point, my friends all sang me happy birthday really loudly as a joke. Eventually, I had to go pee, so I just got out of the car and took a few steps off the trail into the woods. Midstream, I heard what I swore were footsteps nearby. I cut it short and went back into the car, telling my friends I heard footsteps. Jay turned on his headlights again, and he and I being in the front seats were the first ones to scream when we saw somebody standing about 10 feet in front of the car on the side of the trail. It was a woman with her hood up. We expected her to do something, but she just stood there. Jay rolled down his window and asked, "You all right?" The woman then backed slowly into the woods until she was out of sight. It was at this moment that Carl, in the back, somehow while zonked out of his mind, noticed something horrifying. I still remember the moment he said, "Guys, we're surrounded." And all of us started looking around in the woods, and there had to be at least 3 other people dressed in sweaters with the hoods up on different sides of the car, all looking at the car though. Mind you, this was not a cold night, it was the middle of July. They were all standing right off the trail in the woods. Carl in the back seat screamed, causing us to turn around and see a man standing right outside the back windshield looking in. The red glow from the taillights created this creepy red glow in the guy's deadpan expression. I screamed, "Get us out of here, just go," and Jay listened. He put the car in drive and went as fast as he possibly could over the various rocks and bumps in the trail. We were all freaking out, and the way off that trail took way too long. But when we finally reached the pavement again through another exit of the dirt trails, I know we were all relieved. Jay, the most sober out of all of us, told the rest of us who were either drunk or really high that we're going straight home. We've thought about whether those people were just a group of young adults hanging out deep in the woods like we were, but it wouldn't explain all of them just creepily staring at us, standing still. nor would it explain one of them standing directly outside the back windshield looking inside the car, or the fact that they were all wearing hoodies on a summer night. We also realized that scream-type noise we heard most likely wasn't a fox after all, and probably had something to do with them. Either way, off-roading in those woods at nighttime was never an idea we floated again. I'll never forget my little sister's 5th birthday, but not for a positive reason. It was at a tea room type place that did princess parties for kids' birthdays. I didn't want to participate in any of the activities or princess interactions since I was worried about people thinking I was a baby, like a typical tough 6th grader. Instead, I was playing on my DS in a chair in the hallway when a random woman approached me and asked, "Hey, you're Gloria's kid, right?" Gloria is my mom's name, so I told her, yeah. This lady tells me that she's my Aunt Sarah and that I was probably too little to remember the last time we saw each other. She started talking about how big I had gotten and asked how I was doing in school. I was pretty used to these kinds of interactions with relatives, so I didn't question it at all and gave the usual answers. Sarah then told me that she brought a large dollhouse as a birthday present and needed help carrying it out of her car. She told me that she also had brought another cake and offered me the first slice if I helped her. I was almost 12, so I was taught about creeps and the fact that this was an almost textbook kidnapping scenario. But like I said, these kinds of interactions were super common in my family. I also admit that I made the mistake of trusting Sarah more because she was a woman. So I agreed to help and followed Sarah out the back door. The car wasn't parked. It was still running with the man in the driver's seat. Sarah could tell that the man being there made me suspicious, so she quickly told me that was my Uncle Dennis and started urging me to hurry with the dollhouse before the cake frosting melted. I got a bad gut feeling. Why hadn't she asked Dennis to help her carry the dollhouse in? And why did they keep the car running when there was plenty of empty spots to park in? I stood where I was and refused to move. Sarah's tone became much less friendly as she was now commanding me to come to the car. Sarah tried to tug my jacket sleeve, but I swatted her hand away and yelled at her to stop. She looked furious, and for a second I thought Dennis was about to step out of the car. Thankfully, we all heard my mom and aunt loudly yelling my name. Sarah jumped in the car, and she and Dennis both took off. I ran through the back door and met my mom and aunt halfway inside. I immediately told them what happened. My mom hugged me and told me she was so sorry and that everything would be okay, while my aunt told the tea room workers. They basically put the tea room into lockdown and had all the kids gather in one room to make sure no one else had gone missing. Thankfully, no one had. The police eventually came to speak to me about what had happened. I told them as much as I could about Sarah and Dennis. The police officers I spoke to promised me that they would get back to me and my mom if they found out anything new, but we never heard anything back from the police about Sarah or Dennis, or whatever their real names were. As far as we know, they've never been caught. I still have no idea how Sarah knew my mom's name. I just try to be grateful that I'm okay and avoid thinking about what would have happened to me if I hadn't listened to my gut and had followed Sarah to the trunk of her car. My uncle is really well off and has a really cool house on the water with a huge backyard and pool. So for my 21st birthday, he let me use the backyard to throw a big party since he was out of town for the month anyway. Since it was my 21st and I wanted to go crazy, I invited all my friends and told them to invite all of their friends, just as long as they bring their own beer. The party started at 8. My uncle had a surround sound speaker system in the yard that was perfect for parties. I just plugged my burner phone in and put on a music mix that was good for parties. I told everyone that I invited to stay out of the house though unless they were going to the bathroom. It was strictly a backyard party. I quickly realized there were more people than I was anticipating. Almost all of my friends who I invited showed up, with extra people accompanying them. And then on top of that, people I didn't even recognize were walking in groups together through the gates. I had to assume everyone here was invited by people who I invited. But when there were easily more than 80 people in the backyard, I started getting anxiety about the cleanup and potential damage I'd find tomorrow. I tried my best to keep an eye on who was going in and out of the house. It was a long night though, and being the birthday guy, I did get distracted often. The party got way more crowded before it started to slow down, and eventually police came and shut down the party because multiple neighbors complained. so I had to tell everyone to leave except for a select group of my friends. There were about 10 of us left outside by the pool, and these numbers dwindled down until it was just myself and my friend Rob. My uncle told me I can't have anyone sleep over, but honestly I didn't think it would hurt if only Rob stayed over. He was blackout drunk anyway, and would easily just pass out on the couch. I walked him inside, then went back outside to lock both gates, then locked the back door. By the time I got inside, Rob was already sprawled out on the couch in the living room, and any time I'd attempt to talk to him asking if he's asleep already, he'd just make a half-effort groan sound. So I left him there. I checked the bathroom to make sure it wasn't too dirty, and minus a couple empty beer cans on the counter, it wasn't bad. The cleanup wasn't going to be too bad tomorrow with the help of Rob. I went upstairs planning to sleep in one of the many bedrooms, wondering why my uncle was so strict with no one staying over when there's literally 4 extra beds. The 2 fancy stairways in the giant foyer led up to an upstairs balcony that overlooks the foyer, and then a bunch of bedrooms and 2 bathrooms and another living area. I brushed my teeth with my finger in the upstairs bathroom and went right to sleep. I was drunk too, so I fell asleep with ease. I woke up about an hour later feeling really nauseous. I mixed way too many liquors. I had to run to the toilet to puke. After I puked, I walked back out into the upstairs balcony area, and I heard footsteps from down in the foyer. I walked over to the railing of the foyer balcony and looked down. I said, "Rob," and I saw a figure in the darkness below stop moving. I felt like I could see them looking up at me, but with how dark it was in the house, I couldn't see the person's face or any features. I then heard something from the living room downstairs. The sound of snoring. It just dawned on me that the person in the foyer wasn't Rob. I said, "Who is that?" thinking maybe it was just another party guest who maybe passed out somewhere drunk earlier, but they didn't answer. I heard more footsteps from the kitchen area downstairs. My heart started pounding now. I said, "I'm going back to sleep," pretending like I thought they were just party guests, when in reality I was going back to the bedroom to lock the door and call 911 right away. But then I remembered Rob was down there. I had to try to warn him. I called his number and someone picked up. Before saying anything, I said Rob at least 3 times. All I heard was breathing on the other end. I hung up the phone and dialed 911 now, and while on the phone and whispering to the 911 operator, the doorknob to the door twisted around, and then there was a light knock on the door. I asked the operator in a whisper if I should say I'm on the phone with the police, and he said no, don't announce my presence. I asked what about my friend Rob, and he paused for a second as if he didn't know what to tell me. Then he said just wait in the room until police arrive. If they think my friend is asleep, they probably wouldn't harm him. I could tell even the operator didn't really know what to do about that, but I figured that was the best option too. At this point, all I could do was wait in the locked room, waiting out the intruders until the police got there. The operator told me police were arriving now, and that they would try the front and back doors. The police were able to enter through the back door, which was left open by whoever the intruders were. Only then was I instructed to go downstairs and meet them. I woke up Rob and explained everything to the police while he listened, still drunk and confused. I searched the house seeing if anything was missing, but it wasn't my house, so I didn't really know what was there beforehand. My uncle's bedroom was locked, and he didn't have many valuables just sitting out in the open. The police searched the entire house before leaving. They said they'd keep an officer on the block for the night, which made me feel a little better. I never told my uncle about this until one day he asked where his Cartier watch was. Apparently it was stolen right from the kitchen drawer by one of the intruders. It was then that I had to tell him the truth, and obviously he was anything but happy. He never asked me to reimburse him for the watch, but he also never allowed me to throw any kinds of events at his house again, and I can't blame him for that. As a summer-themed video, today's stories focus on a beach theme. Before getting into these, I would like to talk about today's sponsor, Fume. We all have bad habits, and sometimes breaking these habits can be tough. Like when you're out with friends and they're all reaching for their bad habits, you may feel that urge to not be the odd one out. Fume is here to help you kick those bad habits in an enjoyable way with something that you could take out with you. Flavored air device is quickly becoming the leading alternative to vaping and smoking, and Fume is the leader in that category. Fume fills the void ditching a bad habit can leave, while you still have something to reach for. It has no vapor or nicotine, and you can use it anywhere. Crisp mint is my favorite flavor, and with non-toxic flavors, it's a guilt-free alternative. And my favorite part is it requires no batteries, so you'll never need to charge it. The piece also looks cool and is made to be fidgeted with to help calm potential anxiety with magnets, snaps, and clicks. Fume is also backed by doctors in the US. Having served over 300,000 customers, you can be the next success story. For a limited time, use my code NIGHTMARE to get your free Fume base when you order the Journey Pack. It's the all-new magnetic stand for your Fume device. Head to tryfume.com, that's tryfum.com, and use code NIGHTMARE, or scan the QR code on screen. Until I was about 25, I lived in a beach town. My specific neighborhood was about a 20-minute walk from the beach. I'd say about 80% of my personality was beach-related. I've been surfing longer than I've been able to speak, and it would be an anomaly for me to shake out a pair of shoes and not have some amount of sand fall out. My two best friends, let's call them Armand and Chuck, were extroverted, outgoing, and charismatic. We were all 18 and very much obsessed with girls. It was a Saturday night in late May, just a few weeks before school let out. Senioritis had long since set in, and at this point, my friends and I regularly pushed the limits of how much we could get away with without getting in trouble. We already had our coveted college acceptances, so we didn't really care much about high school anymore. Armand and I had plans to meet up with two girls from our high school that we'd been getting along with really well at school. The plan was to pick the two of them up in the evening and enjoy a cool, breezy night on the beach. We had blankets and a few bottles of wine, the perfect combinations for stargazing on the beach. I don't condone drinking and driving to any capacity, but I was just a stupid kid. I arrived at Sophia's house just after 9. Her and Fran sort of walk-danced to the car. It was clear that they had a little something to drink beforehand. Armand and I exchanged some excited grins. It was going to be a fun night. I took a scenic route to a scenic beach. It was about a 30-minute drive. The whole time, the four of us were having a great time in the car, cracking jokes and talking about some mutual friends. At one point, Fran and I were having a very deep philosophical conversation about the nature of time and death and such. We were all very much enjoying each other's company. The specific beach I had chosen had a dirt path that you could drive a car up. From there was a more narrow sand path that we would walk. The path was actually pretty steep, but I had picked it because we were less likely to encounter any other people at such a secluded spot. Furthermore, this beach was further away from the main boardwalk, so the sky would be clearer for stargazing. I thought of everything. I parked my car as far up the dirt road as possible, and the four of us hopped out. Armand and I carried the blankets and wine. I'll fast forward through the boring stuff. After a few hours and an empty bottle, Armand and I found ourselves separating. He and Fran walked up the beach, and Sophia and I walked in the opposite direction. After being separated by a decent amount of distance and darkness, I threw my blanket down and we drunkenly fell asleep on top of it. Before anything happened, Sophia tensed up. At first, I thought it was something that I had done, but then she whispered something. "Do you hear that?" I focused my attention and strained my ears, trying to hear something other than the gentle crashing of ocean waves. I assumed she was just drunk, but then, to my surprise, I did hear something. It sounded almost like a whirring, like the sound a small engine would make. The sound seemed to be moving around. I couldn't pin down where it was even coming from. Then it seemed to fade away into nothingness. "It's nothing," I assured her, eager to resume what we had been doing. And that's what we did. Soon after, I fished my shirt from the sand and shook it out before throwing it over my head. Just then, Sophia, who was still lying on the blanket, shrieked. I whipped around to look at her and saw she was pointing up at something. I looked up, but couldn't see anything besides the blackness of the sky. I sat down next to her to get a better angle, and I was horrified. From her point of view, the moon was perfectly aligned with what appeared to be a drone floating directly overhead. It hovered a little while longer before zipping up into the dark sky and disappearing out of sight. It all made sense. That noise that we had heard before was 100% the drone. I got angry at myself for not realizing at the time. I then got sick at the thought of being watched that entire time. I glanced over at Sophia and could tell she had the same exact feeling. She put her head in her hands and started crying. I consoled her as best I could before suggesting we walk back to the car. The two of us made it to the car to find Armand and Fran already there. I quickly explained the situation. The two of them were dumbfounded, and I could feel the joy in the air literally being sucked out. I began driving in silence in the direction of Sophia's house, eventually trying to lighten the mood with some conversation. It didn't work, though. The girls agreed that they didn't feel safe going home just yet. It was a Saturday night, so I didn't mind staying out late. I asked if we could hang out at either of their houses. They both shook their heads, saying their parents wouldn't allow it. My house was off the table for the same reason, as was Armand's. I decided to ask Armand to call up Chuck, which he did. Chuck's house was massive and his parents were super chill. It was honestly the perfect spot. To our delight, Chuck was free. I pulled into Chuck's driveway and parked the car. Armand and the two girls began making their way towards Chuck's front door, and I told them I'd catch up to them in a second. I needed a second to think about everything that had just happened. I was more shaken up than I was letting on, so I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel and closed my eyes in an attempt to calm down a bit. Honestly, those few seconds with my eyes closed really helped. Instinctively, I pulled out my phone, which I hadn't even touched since the incident. The screen lit up, and I stared at the single notification that sat on the display. I had to blink a few times to make sure I wasn't imagining it. My entire body froze as I stared in horror at the lone notification, "AirTag found moving with you." Every emotion that I had just expelled from my body came crashing back. We were literally being tracked. I snapped out of my paralysis and jumped out of the car, examining every inch of the vehicle. Nothing on the front bumper, nothing in the grille, and nothing on the back. I started getting desperate, checking the seats and flipping floor mats. Still nothing. By now, sweat was pouring down my neck, and I could feel the hairs on my arms and legs clamping up. I got on my hands and knees and began examining the underside of my car. I got to the tire on the driver's side and began feeling around the tire well. And there it was. It was literally taped to the underside of the well. Impossible to find if you didn't know what you were looking for. I held the tag in my hand for a few seconds before throwing it to the ground and smashing it to pieces. Whoever had watched us on the beach with that drone knew where we were. I didn't feel safe in Chuck's driveway all alone. I picked up one of the broken AirTag pieces and ran over to Chuck's front door. I told everyone what I had discovered, showing them the AirTag pieces to prove it. They were even more horrified than I was, especially the girls. They checked their phones and saw the same notification. Chuck was particularly pissed off because we had been potentially tracked back to his house. After the panic subsided, we spent the rest of the night in Chuck's basement and ended up sleeping over. A couple weeks passed and nothing happened. Honestly, my friends and I were glad to forget about the whole thing, assuming it was entirely in the past now. The only way we could rationalize it was that some creep wanted to watch some young adults hook up on the beach and track their car to scare them. It was chilling to think about, but we were relieved that the situation hadn't escalated. One Sunday morning, about 3 weeks after the incident, I got a call from Chuck. He screamed through the phone for me to drive to his house as soon as possible, which I did. When I got there, he was standing in his driveway with a concerned look on his face and some paper in his hand. I was confused until I realized what he was holding. They weren't papers, but rather pictures. I examined them more closely. Pictures of me from that night on the beach. They were grainy and dimly lit, but you could clearly see Sophia and I in revealing fashion. I was disgusted. I could only imagine how Sophia would feel upon finding out. Not knowing what to do, we called the police and explained the situation. They told us that there was essentially nothing they could do, but we insisted that they at least scan the photos for prints. They eventually got back to us saying the photos turned up nothing. Sophia was terrified that whoever sent them would try and blackmail her, and I feared the same. The experience was downright traumatizing. Luckily, nothing ever happened after that, probably because we had gotten the police involved. Sophia was never quite the same around me after what happened, and I can't blame her. I can only hope those pictures don't turn up later in my life. My best friend Ricardo and I were 19. At the risk of sounding pretentious, the two of us come from well-off North Jersey families and get to enjoy our summers down the Jersey Shore. My house is in Belmar, New Jersey, and his is in Lavallette. It was a random summer night during the week, and Ricardo was driving the two of us from my house in Belmar down to Lavallette, about an hour drive. To be completely honest, I preferred hanging out in Ricardo's house, not only because it was a little nicer, but because the general vibe of Lavalette is more geared towards kids our age. If we weren't scouring the area for a party, we could enjoy some drinks on one of the many private beaches we technically weren't supposed to be on. I could go on and on about things to do down the shore, but for the sake of brevity, I'll try my best to get to the point. As we were driving down, we agreed that we'd opt for a quieter night. No partying, links, or anything that we might normally do. The two of us agreed to snag a few beers, roll a joint, and chill on one of the private beaches under the stars. Honestly, it sounded great. The two of us had been going pretty hard with some of our other friends. A break from partying was much needed. To anyone unfamiliar with the layout of Lavalette, there's a beach side and a bay side. Most of the beaches feature a really high dune and a steep drop-off as you approach the ocean. If you were to stand at the ocean edge and look back, you'd see a pretty sizable hill of sand. After drinking a few drinks at Ricardo's place, we snagged some bikes from his garage and made our way toward the beach of our choice. For whatever reason, Ricardo insisted on journeying further than I'd ever been, which I didn't quite understand since all the beaches were basically the same. I really didn't mind a longer bike ride though, so I just went with it. Eventually, Ricardo decided on a desolate-looking beach at the end of the road with no cars parked on it. Every house on the street had its lights off. I actually preferred this. This was back when weed was illegal in New Jersey, and we weren't too keen on getting caught. Plus, we did have some drinks with us despite the fact that we were only 19. We hid our bikes under some shrubs. Then we made our way toward the beach. The two of us lit our J and smoked under the stars, the only sound being the light waves of the ocean and the accompanying wind. The beach stretched on endlessly in both directions, and the sand felt cool underneath our feet. The two of us got progressively drunker while we filled the air with laughter and conversation. Eventually, we just laid back in the sand, watching a sky full of stars in hopes of witnessing a shooting star. That's when we heard it. I heard it first. It was almost undetectable. The sound was like a metallic buzzing, sort of like the sound you'd hear in a massive gymnasium with large overhead lights. I really can't describe the sound any better. It was a faint, metallic buzz that couldn't possibly be anything caused by the beach. I sat up and stared at Ricardo, and I could tell the moment he started to hear it too. The two of us whipped our heads in every direction, looking into the darkness for the source of the drone. Strangely, it was difficult to pin down exactly where the sound was coming from. It was just too faint to tell. We were beginning to get freaked out, but were too terrified to move. We assumed that whatever was making that noise would go away, and we wouldn't have to worry about it. There was literally no way we could be seen from our spot on that beach. It was way too dark, and the sound of the ocean definitely drowned out any sounds we had been making. I know it doesn't exactly sound scary, but I'd be lying if I said my heart wasn't pounding out of my chest. The drone continued on, and after another few minutes, Ricardo gestured for me to follow him. I nodded my head in agreement. Leaving was definitely the best option. Just like a scene from a movie, the exact second the two of us stood up, the droning went from a 1 to a 5. It took every ounce of self-control I had to resist the urge to yell in fear. It wasn't a gradual shift. The sound literally increased in a split second, and it was definitely coming from our right. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up, and a wave of fear washed over me, tensing my body from head to toe. We stared into the darkness and still didn't see anything. But now the drone sounded so close to us that we instinctively started running toward the sand dune. I didn't even know what we were running from. All I knew was that something was seriously wrong and there was someone or something after us. As we were about halfway to the dune, I felt Ricardo place a firm hand on my shoulder, abruptly stopping me from continuing to run. At first, I was confused, but then I saw what his gaze was fixated on. I glanced up toward the dune and saw it. There was a dark figure standing motionlessly at the peak of the dune. Its arms were freakishly long, almost reaching its knees. It was ridiculously tall, and I was shocked at how it managed to stand so still. It was truly terrifying. Ricardo shouted at me, breaking my gaze from the figure, and we continued running, this time parallel to the beach. We ran to the next dune entrance and sprinted up the slope. As we made our way to the peak, we looked back at where we had just came from. I can still remember the terrifying sight that followed. Not only was the dark figure still on the dune, but there were maybe 3 or 4 more standing motionless on the slope. Each one looked like they were facing us. We didn't have time to go back for our bikes, instead opting to run the entire way home. The next morning, We retraced our steps, but couldn't for the lives of us find those bikes. Maybe they had been stolen, or maybe whoever or whatever was stalking us the night before had something to do with it. Either way, I've never experienced anything scarier on a beach and still have trouble explaining most of these events. The weirdest thing for me is I was never able to determine what the buzzing drone was, and to this day, have not heard anything even remotely close to it. Beaches have always terrified me. Well, not always. My fear is a direct result of what I'm about to tell you. As a kid, I used to love the shore. I remember spending many summers in eager anticipation of the weekend when my family and I would hang out at our beach house. Or, if I was lucky, they'd let me spend it at my friend Charles' beach house, which was even more fun. I was 16, and this was one of those special summer weekends. Me, Charles, and our third friend Riley were going to spend a few unsupervised days at Charles' beach house in LBI. Riley was a year older than Charles and I, and had recently gotten his license, so we'd be driving down in his car. The drive down was fantastic. Riley was a pretty uncoordinated driver at the time, so most of the ride was spent laughing at him swerving and cursing the road. It was great. We got down to LBI in good time and immediately moved all of our stuff from the car to the rooms we'd be staying in. The layout of the house is important to the story, so I'll briefly mention it. There's a front door, a garage door which connects the back to the front yard, a back sliding door, and a back upstairs deck that connects the upstairs bedrooms. There's also a spiral staircase that allows you to go directly from the back deck to the ground, so you can enter and exit the house from upstairs. The house sits along a lagoon, meaning the back end of the house faces a narrow channel of water, with houses on the opposite side. We were at that ripe age where chasing girls was a priority, and a nice beach house all to ourselves was the perfect occasion. We spent a few hours figuring out which girls were down the shore at the time and talked to them on Snapchat. Finally, we found a group of 3 cute girls that said they'd be down to come kick back at Charles' house. I had more than enough weed to last us the weekend, and we had snagged a few bottles of our parents' alcohol before leaving. It was perfect. Things were going very well. The 3 girls, Rosie, Alexa, and Sophie, were fun and flirty, and the 3 of us could tell where the night would probably end up. At one point, the 6 of us decided to smoke in Charles' backyard pool. It was small, but it was perfect for 6 drunk kids. I remember the sight vividly. The gentle bay breeze blowing through my hair, the steam from the heated water rising slowly with the puffs of smoke from the joint. At our age, this was bliss. But then suddenly, Charles turned the music all the way down and stared over my shoulder into the darkness of the lagoon. Confused, I turned around, peering into the darkness. I could roughly make out the houses on the other side of the lagoon, but I wasn't quite sure what Charles was looking at. One of the girls asked Charles why he turned the music down, and he whispered that he saw someone standing on the dock opposite the house. I figured he was messing with us, so I started laughing. "Who cares, bro? People literally live here," I said. Charles shook his head. "I know that family personally. My parents said they're in Florida for the week." In all honesty, I still thought it wasn't a big deal or he was just messing around, so I kept chuckling. The girls were a little freaked out though, and said they wanted to go back inside. I wasn't going to argue, so the 6 of us started making our way out of the pool. As we were drying off in the yard, Riley jumped and cursed, looking towards the lagoon. The rest of us turned, and even though the light was dim, I could definitely see what looked like movement coming from the opposite dock. The 6 of us froze in place, trying to get a better glimpse of what we were looking at. Just then, a passing car on the road across from us lit up the scene ever so slightly, and the sight was horrifying. There were 4 tall silhouettes standing at the edge of the dock, facing us. It was impossible to tell what they were wearing or what they looked like, but there was no doubt they were facing our direction. "Go inside now," said Charles with a shaky voice, motioning us toward the sliding door. As we rushed inside, I heard a distinct sound that remains the most terrifying noise I'd ever heard. 4 consecutive splashes rang out from behind us. Those guys were swimming across the lagoon. We were in full-on panic mode at that point. The girls screamed while Riley slammed the sliding door shut and locked it. Charles quickly ran to the front to lock that door too, and the 6 of us ran to the room that wasn't visible from the outside. We waited in silence, horrified at what we might hear next. A few minutes passed, still nothing. Out of nowhere, Riley cursed, revealing to us that he had forgotten to lock the sliding door on the deck. Charles started to panic, knowing that this house was about to be broken into. Just then, we heard soft, quieted footsteps above us, and that was the last straw. None of us had any weapons on hand, and we were all intoxicated, so running was really our only option. The 6 of us sprinted for the front door and bolted to the car, which Riley started up in a flash. The chaos of it all was too much for Riley to handle, and he destroyed Charles' mailbox on the way out of the driveway. Once we were far enough away, we called the police. The ordeal was a nightmare. We went back to the house once police had searched it, but the news was shattering. All of the valuables on the top floor were missing, but that wasn't the worst part. Charles' family owned a medium-sized Boston whaler boat, which was also stolen, most likely as the getaway vehicle. Charles' father tended to keep a spare set of keys inside a small hatch below the steering wheel, which the police concluded was how the culprits got away so quickly. How they knew where the key was hidden is something I still wonder. The police were never able to arrest the perpetrators, and likely never will. Charles, Riley, and I think whoever robbed the house might have been someone who knew Charles' family, and they knew where the key was, and the house was supposed to be vacant that weekend as well. It's been a long time since this chilling event took place, but I haven't let one day pass without locking every door and window in my home. Do yourself a favor and lock your doors at night. For my friend Ryan's 21st birthday, I threw him a surprise party at my house. I invited all of our friends in our group, plus some acquaintances and friends of friends who were brought along. My parents weren't home for the night, so it worked out nicely. The peak of the night was when Ryan walked in the door and all of us got to scream surprise. It was a Friday night, so mostly everyone drank a decent amount. I tried not to get too drunk, just so I could stay alert in case anyone was doing something dumb in my parents' house. We had cake and other desserts set up for Ryan too. I did a lot of walking around offering cake and beers to everyone, even people I'd never met before, including one guy with long blonde hair and a football shirt sitting on my couch, and some dude who looked a few years older sitting on my grandma's old rocking chair that she gave to my mom. I whispered into Ryan's ear at some point that half these random dudes that our friends brought over looked either kinda creepy or odd. He agreed with me, a bit over-enthusiastically, but that's probably because he was a lot drunker than I was. The night progressed and everyone got drunker, and everyone was doing increasingly silly and dumb things. The guy who was still in the rocking chair started to hum a song really loudly and obnoxiously. The rest of us just watched and found it hilarious for some reason. Then the guy with the long blonde hair started to sing a completely different song, and everyone else kind of just joined along. It was a room full of drunk 20-something-year-olds singing very loudly. It was a fun time, but eventually it had to end, and people started leaving one by one as they sobered up. A couple of people stayed the night because they were too drunk to drive, including Ryan and our friend Sean. I slept in the living room with them. We left the TV on, with the movie The Hangover on in the background. I suddenly thought to ask the two, who were those two guys who had been in the living room on the couch and in the rocking chair most of the night? Sean said the guy with the long blonde hair was a friend of one of our other friends, but as far as the guy in the rocking chair, neither of them had a clue. I decided to text everyone in the group chat we had made prior to the surprise party to find out who was friends with this creepy dude in the rocking chair. One by one, our friends said they had no idea. It seemed everyone assumed he knew someone there, but apparently that wasn't the case. I was waiting on 2 more friends to answer, but I was pretty sure one of them had to have known him. Anyway, Sean and Ryan fell asleep quickly, so I decided to go to sleep too. I woke up an hour later though, I guess to the sound of the TV. I checked my phone, which was sitting on my chest. There were a bunch of texts from the group chat. To put it short, every single person in the group chat said they had no idea who that was. I sat up to let that sink in better. Some random, creepy-looking older dude snuck into my house and hid in plain sight for hours. I suddenly looked around the living room, lit up by the glow of the TV. I felt as if my entire house was unsafe and that we weren't alone. I quietly stepped out from the living room towards the kitchen. I went over to the tiny hall that separates the kitchen from the 3 bedrooms on the first floor, still using the glow from the TV in the living room as my light source to navigate. I think because I didn't want to draw attention, I guess. I stepped into the hall and froze. I was pretty sure I could see something at the end of the hall. It was too dark though. I took a couple steps forward, and it became more clear that there was a person standing there at the end of the hall. Then to make it even worse, I heard a faint, low, cackling kind of laugh at the far end of the hall. I slowly backed away without acting fazed at all. Meanwhile, I felt like my heart dropped to my stomach. I got back to the living room and shook my 2 friends awake. I whispered to them that someone was in the house with us. I got on the phone with the police and talked as low as I could into the phone so that the woman on the other end could still hear me. And as I was on the phone, I saw the creepy guy from earlier, the guy who was on the rocking chair all night, suddenly walk out to the living room, look at us sitting there, passed us, and walked out the front door. I was literally frozen. I think my friends were too. I told the 911 operator that the intruder just left my house. She said lock all the doors and we should be fine. A cop came by for a few minutes just to check in. After he left, my friends and I found a trail of blood stains on the carpet in the hallway. The stains led to the end of the hall, where I saw him standing. Then it just stopped. Needless to say, no sleep was had that night. I'm sure we all have those memories from our childhood that make us uncomfortable to think about. How we were so young and innocent and unknowing to something bad that was about to happen. I was in the 1st grade. It was either a Friday or Saturday night. All I know is we didn't have school the next day. My friend's mom set up a little party for his birthday at a local bowling alley. All his friends and their parents were there, and we were sectioned off into different lanes to play with different groups. I wasn't having a lot of fun, mainly because I stunk at bowling, and still do to this day. I remember complaining and crying to my mom that I didn't want to play anymore, and I think one of the kids started taking my turn for me. There was a back room sectioned off for the party with a bunch of snacks, sweets, and sodas. So while my mom was talking to some of the other parents, I think that's when I snuck to that back room to fill my stomach with cupcakes and other sweets. There was a door leading to the outside in this room. It led to the back of the building, I guess. And the next thing I remember was the moment a man was standing at the doorway telling me to come outside and check something out. To this day, it still makes me cringe, thinking back and remembering that I actually listened to the random man and went out there. Upon stepping outside, the man knelt down to my level so that we were face to face. Then he pointed at a truck that was running maybe 5 yards away. I remember he said he had the rest of the sweets and snacks in the back of his truck, and he needed help unloading it. He also offered to give me a $20 reward if I helped him. Now, I'm sure in my 6-year-old mindset, I was thinking about how cool I'd look, and how jealous all the other kids would be. I followed the man to his truck. He opened the back door for me, and pointed at a big black plastic bag sitting in his back seat. I climbed into the truck, and the next thing I remember was the horrific, ear-piercing scream of a woman. It was my mom, standing at the back doorway of the bowling alley, screaming my name over and over. I ran to my mom, who grabbed me and held me tight as I heard the sound of tires skidding out, followed by a truck speeding away. I turned to look, and the truck was already gone. My mom was in tears, scolding me. A few other parents and kids came out, and it turned into a huge scene. It was a traumatizingly embarrassing experience for me. The bowling alley had to shut operations for the night, and the party had to be cut short. I've asked my mom about this story so many times. She said the police arrived after my dad picked me up, and my mom told the police everything I told her. She also got a decent look at the man and his truck, so she gave a description to the police as well. Unfortunately, nothing was ever heard as far as the police catching him. All I have to say is, if any of you are parents, burn the phrase "don't talk to strangers" into your kids' heads. For my son's 12th birthday, my wife and I threw him a little party in the backyard. We invited the whole family, as we usually did for any of our kids' birthdays, and let him invite all of his friends too. We live in rural New Jersey, so our backyard connects to forest on 2 sides. We also have a pretty big property, which allowed us to space out a bunch of tables on the grass with food and refreshments. The little party went into the night. Most of our guests left, but closer family and some of our friends stayed late. It was probably 8 o'clock. The mosquitoes were out in full force, so I decided to run over to the shed at the far end of the backyard by the woods to fetch the tiki torches. I grabbed like 6 torches and set them on the grass while I went back in to look for fuel. However, while I was in the shed, I heard steps in the woods. I stopped what I was doing to take a look out there, but honestly, it was just too dark to see out into the woods. After finding the fuel, I went back to the part of the yard everyone else was at and pitched the torches into the ground. The 6 torches gave off a decent amount of light while keeping us safe from the blood-sucking pests. There were about 6 kids left, including my son, and they all wanted to play hide-and-seek in the woods. My wife and I allowed it, just making sure to tell them to stay close to the tree line. My son and his friends went to play their little game in the woods, which left the rest of us to sit in peace for a little bit. It was a solid 15 minutes of talking with relatives and hearing the kids laughing and yelling in the near distance out in the woods. But all of a sudden, the yelling turned to screams. Concerning sounding screams from the kids. All of us looked at each other, sitting up in concern. The kids one by one came running out of the woods, yelling that there's something in there. We don't have bears or any big predatory animals around here, so that was not the first thing we assumed it to be. I told all the kids to stay near the patio area. My brother Dom and I, being the biggest men there, decided to go investigate. We took a couple flashlights and off we went into the pitch-black woods. The only sounds we heard around us were crickets and other night bugs. So we went deeper, and that's when we started to hear something else. It sounded like an animal at first, but as we followed the sound to get closer, the sound started to become more human-like. We continued to walk, and we agreed we both had the feeling that we were being watched, like stalked. I put my arm out to stop Dom. Standing in the silence now, the best way I could describe the sound we were hearing was a moaning, angry kind of sound. It sounded human, but it was a bizarre sound. Then, a few cracks of the leaves on the ground ahead of us. We aimed our lights over there, and there was someone or something behind the tree. The moaning sound stopped. Dom stepped forward and called out. What happened next was textbook horror movie stuff. A scream, so loud, so blood-curdling, so inhuman, filled the air. I'm sure it could be heard for miles. Dom and I turned and booked it back to the property. We waved at everyone to go inside when we made it back. Dom got on the phone with the sheriff's department. They said it was probably a wild animal. We wanted to insist it was a human, but we honestly couldn't. We to this day don't know who or what we saw and heard in those woods, but it was definitely stalking us and the kids when they were playing hide and seek. And that scream we heard, it just didn't sound human to us.